Share my screen now.
Yes.
Okay.
You're ready to go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Should be showing, Micha.
All visible.
Okay.
Azure portal visible now.
Let me close this one. Let me get my slide deck. All showing?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we can start.
Yes, the recording has been started. So.
Okay. So hello everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome. We hope you already enjoyed the other sessions today. Micha's and my session is titled Azure Bastion One does not simply walk into my VNet. We think with the title on the picture, the topic and the theme will be rather clear. And we hope that by the end of the session, everyone who is not yet using Azure Bastion yet starts using it. Before we start, we want to thank the organizers and everybody involved for setting up this event and for allowing us to deliver this talk. And of course, also a big thank you to the sponsors, because without them, organizing such a huge event probably would not be possible. So thank you to all the sponsors. They're on the slide, so you can check those out also. On the agenda today, the things we're talking about. First of all, we're looking at all the common VM administrative access methods, the different ways, the good and the bad ones, on how you can connect to your Azure IaaS VM before Bastion then, followed by a demo. Then we will talk about what Azure Bastion is, and we will dig a little bit deeper in how you can deploy, configure, and start using it. And of course, we will also show some demos. After the last demo, we will look at the future roadmap, and we also go through the key takeaways to really focus on the things we think you should really remember when you start using Azure Bastion. And before closing off, we hope we still have some time for a Q&A where we would love to answer any of your questions. But if you don't have the time and you have some questions later on, you can always contact us through our Twitter handles or LinkedIn. So let me shortly introduce myself. My name is Wim Matthijssen. I live in Belgium, where I work as an Azure technical advisor at a company called Proximus. As a Microsoft certified trainer, I also deliver all kinds of Azure workshops and trainings. Community-wise, I'm just as Micha, a founding board member of a Belgian user group called MC2MC, which stands for Microsoft Cloud and Client Management Community. And we focus mostly on Azure and Microsoft 365, but we also keep an eye on security, Hyper-V, and almost a complete Windows Server landscape. Next to that, I also have my blog. It's on the slide, https://wmatthijssen.com. And since July last year, I'm also awarded as a Microsoft Azure MVP, which was and still is a huge honor. And like most IT professionals these days, I'm also on Twitter, LinkedIn. And yeah, if you ever have a question or you just want to reach out, or even just if you want to say hi, you can always contact me through those socials. We also put a QR code on it, so if you scan it, you will directly go through to our LinkedIn page. I will now let Micha introduce himself.
Thank you, Wim. So my name is Micha Wets. I'm an independent contractor. I work at Aspects, which is a CSP in Belgium. I'm a technology strategist over there. Next to that, I also do some WVD solution architecting at NXP in the Netherlands and some smaller things as well. As Wim, proud member of MC2MC, which is an awesome user group in Belgium. And I think at the end of 2018 became Microsoft MVP for Windows Virtual Desktop, which is still my focusing area. But next to that, also Azure services. You can see my Twitter handle there as well, my blog page and my LinkedIn page. So if you have questions, do not hesitate, contact Wim. Don't bother me, contact Wim. And
That's a good one.
Just kidding. So we're always available for questions and things like that. Back to you, Wim.
Yeah. So I think we can now start focusing on our first topic, common VM administrative access methods. As most of you will know, the easiest way, but also the least secure one to connect to an Azure VM is through the use of a public IP address, shortly said a PIP. In this way, you can connect to the VM through RDP or SSH, depending if the VM is a Windows or a Linux VM. You just need to associate a new or even an existing PIP to your VM's network interface. And if the subnet where the VM is part of is protected with an NSG, which should be best practice-wise, you just need to create an inbound security role to allow TCP port 2389 for RDP or TCP port 22 to allow SSH to get it all working. But let us say this way of connecting to your IaaS VMs is good when you're studying for an Azure exam, or if you just need to do a quick test in your company's dev test subscription, for example. But you should never, mark our words, use it in any Azure production environment to connect to your business critical VMs. And this because one or both of the management ports will be widely opened on the internet. And in this way, your VM can easily be attacked or breached by hackers, script kiddies, or like you can see on the slide, by orcs, for example. Another way to connect to your IaaS VMs is by placing them behind an Azure external load balancer. Instead of the VM, the load balancer then uses the PIP and redirects the connection to the VMs or VMs behind it. In Micha's and my opinion, it's kind of security through obscurity, like they say, because one or both management ports will be still widely opened on the internet. Only now there is an external load balancer in front. And again, yeah, for us, not a real secure method to connect to your IaaS VMs in any production, pre-prod, or even a QI environment. And this because attackers mostly target those management ports on those internet-facing VMs. They can use port scans, brute force attacks, or even DDoS attacks. And in case of, for example, a successful brute force attack, an attacker can easily compromise the VM, and by this establishing a foothold into your environment, from where they can do whatever they want to do, or when, for example, one of your IaaS web servers with an opened RDP port is breached, attackers can start installing crypto mining malware and use that server for cryptocurrency mining. And I think that's not something you want to have running in your environment. On this slide, you can clearly see that whenever you have some opened or both management ports open, if it's RDP or SSH, and you open the associated NSG on your subnet, you will see that the name field, the rule name, is preceded by a hazard triangle, like you can see, with an exclamation mark, in which way Microsoft or Azure wants to tell you that there is a security risk by opening these ports to the internet. And also, for example, if you're using Azure Security Center, there will probably be a security recommendation that tells you that those management ports should be closed on those virtual machines. So look out for those things. It can really give you some advice on how to better protect it, or where Microsoft is seeing a security issue, for example. So then, of course, the question we all need to ask ourselves is, how can we securely connect to our VMs? Well, first of all, by using a site-to-site VPN or an express route. In this way, you can connect from your on-premises network to the private IP address of the VM. You can also use, for example, a point-to-site VPN to set up a secure connection to a VNet. Mostly this would be the hub VNet or your connectivity VNet in your connectivity subscription. And this from your own computer, or if more security is required, from a privileged access workstation or a PAO, like they say. I think these days a point-to-site VPN supports certificate-based authentication, even Radius. It supports the OpenVPN protocol. And you can also use, instead of certificates, you can start using Azure AD authentication. Next to those, there is another resource Micha and I also regularly see being used in Azure's customer environments, namely a jump box or a jump host or jump server, like some people like to name it. Simply said, a jump box is an EA server which is used to access and manage all the other VMs in your environment. Mostly, it's deployed in a separate security zone, a management VNet or subnet. If you're using the hub spoke model, of course. And you can see it as a control entry point into your Azure environment. You kind of jump from that control entry point to the other VMs in your environment. To allow access from the internet, mostly this VM also uses a PIP, and most of the time it's deployed as a Windows VM, but you can also deploy it as a small Linux VM. We're kind of going to tunnel your RDP connection through SSH. And I think instead of a Linux VM, we even saw some customer using an RDS gateway, which also run as a small-sized VM. So you can see that the jump box is a good alternative to create a secure connection, but went too fast. It's already there on the slide. But you see, and you should be aware of that. It's once again another resource for you to keep updated and backed up, and when you need to troubleshoot when it fails, and also if you want to foresee high availability, which is the case in most environments. You should at least have 2 jump boxes deployed. So in the case of one is down, you still have a second one you can use to connect to your spoke VMs. So if you're still using a jump box, or if you're thinking of using a jump box in your environment and you have an associated PIP, a way to protect it is with the use of just-in-time VM access, or shortly said, JIT. JIT enables you to lock down your VMs at the network level by blocking inbound traffic to specific management ports, like, for example, REP or SSH. And in the meantime, it will limit the amount of time that those management ports are open. I still believe it's with a maximum of 24 hours. Know that JIT is available when you use the Azure Defender on tier of Azure Security Center. Also, just keep in mind that it can all be used for Azure Resource Manager VMs. So no classic VM supports for everyone. We're still running those. I hope not a lot of people. Maybe it's also good to know how it works. Well, first of all, a user needs to request access to a VM. Then Security Center checks if that user has role-based access permissions for that VM. If so, the request is approved. And then Security Center automatically configures the NSG to allow inbound traffic to the necessary port, for example, RDP or SSH. And this for the requested amount of time. So if you set it to 8 hours, it will be, you will be able to connect to RDP or SSH for at least 8 hours. When that time window is passed, Security Center automatically restores the NSG back to its previous stage, by which the NSG no longer allowed that specific port to be accessed. Good to know is that all those connections and requests can be reviewed in the activity log, so that can always come in handy from time to time. But let me show this in the demo. Let me quickly go to my Azure portal. So I'm already logged in, for time's sake, into my Azure portal. So for example, if you go to my virtual machines tab, you will see I have some VMs running in my environment. I have some Linux and Windows. You can see I have a jump box. You can see that jump box has a normal IP address and has a PIP connected to it with a public IP address. So it's a Windows VM. If I want to connect to it with RDP, just know that this one is protected with JIT. The thing I need to do is just click on connect, click on the RDP tab, it will open, and then you will see this VM has just-time access policy. So to request access, I just need to request the access, click on the button. It will take some time. You can follow it. Normally, it will take around 30 seconds, I think, before everything is put in place in the back. So if I now just download the RDP file, I already downloaded today just to test. I click on open file. I click on the connect button. Let me My super secret username is already there. So let me now type in my super secret password. Make my passwords a little bit longer, smaller for demos, so I don't need to type it that lot. And you can see I'm connecting through RDP on the public IP address, and I can do whatever I want. Yeah, when I need to manage my VM, I can open everything. So you can see this jump box is protected with JIT. So let me go to the Azure portal. Let me show what's happening in the back. So if you open up Security Center, thing we also set on the slide is that at least you should have the Azure Defender on. So if you want to change that one, you just go to coverage. You see your VMs, you see fully covered, partially covered. You see I have a specific plan. The jump host is configured on my management subscription. I can click on edit plan, and you will see Azure Defender on is enabled for this subscription. If you now look at another subscription, you can see the Azure Defender on. If I want to start using JIT and all the other features, I just click on Azure Defender on. I select everything I need, which resources are available. Yeah, keep in mind that you need to pay for those. And you just click on save, and that's it. And you can start using JIT and all the extra features that are available in Azure Defender on. But let me close this one. So if you want to look at JIT in the back, just click on Azure Defender. I can scroll down to the bottom. You see a specific button, just-in-time VM access. You can click on it, and you can see the jump box is here. I have 2 requests. It's active now. It's on port 3389. If, for example, I want to change some of the settings, the time range, for example, is 3 hours. You just click on it, and you can start changing everything. You can also use other protocols. You can also use other source IPs. You can do whatever you want. So this is what JIT is all about. So I think, Micha, we can go to you for the next part of our session.
Yes. Let me share my screen.
It's there.
It's there. Yeah, it's sunny in Belgium, so I wanted a beautiful background. It's a Bing background, so okay. So let's dive into what is Azure Bastion and how it can help us. First, the definition from Microsoft. So what is Azure Bastion? But we will talk about it, but we wanted to show you this. So Azure Bastion is a PaaS service, which is provisioned inside your virtual network. It gives you secure and seamless RDP or SSH connectivity to your virtual machines directly from the Azure portal using SSL. That's Microsoft's definition. Now let's see what it is exactly. So it is a PaaS service. Wim and I tend to call it a jump box as a service. And this PaaS service is provisioned inside your virtual network. So you have your virtual network and Microsoft just deploys this PaaS service inside that VNet. It gives you indeed a secure RDP or SSH connection to your virtual machines in the background. And it gives you this connection inside your Azure portal. So you don't need a client, you don't need anything, it's inside your Azure portal. Also, a big advantage is, of course, your virtual machines do not require a public IP anymore. So you can just join them into the VNet. They all have private IPs. No public IPs need to be attached, so it cannot be accessed from the outside. And it just uses your private IP address. On your virtual machines, you don't need to install anything. You don't need to change anything. It's agentless. It's fully managed by Microsoft, and you just have to make sure that the virtual machine is accessible for RDP or SSH. That's it. Inside the Azure Bastion, inside the PaaS service, it's a VM scale set, so it can scale up and down. But again, you don't have to manage or worry about that. You just create your Bastion host, and Microsoft manages it for you. Another thing is it gives you protection. So it protects you from port scanning. It protects you from the zero-day exploits. Also, malware targeting is impossible because it's just not connected to the internet. So these are all advantages, of course, to use Azure Bastion. How does it work? This is a simple environment, but it gives you a great overview. So you have your virtual network. Inside your virtual network, you have your 3 virtual machines. Let me otherwise enable my laser pointer. So you have your virtual network. You have 3 virtual machines. They are in a subnet protected by an NSG. And if you want to enable Azure Bastion, you inject the Azure Bastion host inside your virtual network. Wim will dive into the prerequisites and things like that, but you can insert it into your virtual network. The only thing that is exposed to the internet is your Bastion host. So only 443 is exposed to the Bastion host. So you don't only need to allow that one on your NSG. Of course, in your subnet in the NSG from your virtual machines, you need to allow 3389 or 22 so that the Bastion hosts still can connect to your virtual machines. That's the only requirement. No public IPs, so all your virtual machines can simply use the private IP. And that's it. That's all you need. Something to keep in mind, until a few months ago, there was a big limitation on Azure Bastion, which required to have an Azure Bastion host in each VNet. So even if the VNet was peered, it was not able to connect to your virtual machines. Luckily, a few months ago, and now in preview, VNet peering is supported. So you can install your Azure Bastion host in a hub, in your hub VNet, and you can still have virtual machines inside your spoke virtual VNets, peer them all up, connect them to each other, and only use one Azure Bastion host. As you can see,
it's even not anymore in preview, Micha. It's
not
in the meantime. Yeah, it's a few
awesome.
weeks ago.
Okay.
It went GA. So
okay, so it's GA. You can simply use it.
voila.
So only one Azure Bastion needs to be installed in the hub, and the spoke VNets can be used and can be accessed from your hub Azure Bastion host. What can you do in a remote session? It's not a full RDP or not a full SSH connection, so there are some limitations. You can copy and paste text, no files, no images, no things like that. It's only text. It does have the possibility to go full screen, so it's not only limited to your browser image, to your browser screen. You can go full screen, but there is no support for files. So you file transfer. So you cannot transfer files from your virtual machines to your local machine. You have to find other ways to copy the files to your local machine. But these are only small disadvantages if you compare it to all the advantages of Azure Bastion. Some use cases. If you don't have a VPN or an express route, like Wim mentioned, these are the best protections because it's always secure. If you don't have such connections, no site-to-site, no point-to-site, then you can use Azure Bastion, of course. Also, if the jump box doesn't meet the security requirements from your company, where 3389 is not allowed, where you have some Azure policies, for example, or even if you have an Azure policy which doesn't allow public IP addresses, then you can definitely use an Azure Bastion host. If there is a hard requirement for HTTPS, then Azure Bastion is your way to go. Also, no management, so it's PaaS service. Install it, use it, and it's available. No management for you. Also, if you want to have something that's easily deployable, like Wim will show, or an easy removable, then Azure Bastion is definitely something to look at. And also, if you want to allow temporary access to your virtual machine, so not only the VM, but with JIT connected to it, then you should definitely look at the Azure Bastion hosts. Pricing, it's always an important one. This is the base price of an Azure Bastion host in a particular zone. So it's around 117 euros per month if you keep it running for an entire month. On top of that, there's also the data that you transfer. That's kind of standard within Azure. The price that you pay depends on how many gigabytes that you put through the Azure Bastion host. First 5 gigabytes are free, and then you can see the table below how much it will cost you. Also, depending on the zones, if the Azure Bastion host needs to connect to a different zone, these are the zones that you need to keep in mind. Enough talking, let's see some Azure Bastion. I deployed 2 virtual machines, so I filled it on a particular resource group, 2 virtual machines, one Linux VM and one Windows virtual machine. And next to that, in the same resource group, I have a Bastion host deployed. So it's already deployed, but Wim will show you how you can deploy it. If we look at the Windows virtual machine, important to notice, it doesn't have a public IP, only a private IP. The same with the Linux virtual machine, no public IP, only private IP address. If we would connect, like Wim showed, using the connect option and RDP over here, then you will see that we would get a RDP file connected to the private IP address. And without a site-to-site, point-to-site connection, we would not be able to connect to our virtual machine. So there's the additional button Bastion. Downside is that if you click on Bastion, it just says use Bastion, which will redirect you to this operation over here. So if you want to connect to your virtual machine, I would not suggest use this button, but just directly go to Bastion. Then you get the request for a username and a password, of course. Well, let me connect. And hit the connect button. A new screen pops up, a new tab. And you have your connection to your session host. This is kind of like a RDP session that you would do into your virtual machine. But as you can see, it's from within my Azure browser, my Azure portal, and it is within my browser. And I can simply start managing my virtual machine. If there are things installed, you can really connect to it, computer management, everything like you would do on a regular virtual machine. This is a Windows virtual machine. The same can be done with a Linux virtual machine. So if we go to my Linux VM, go to Bastion, you have the option to use a private key, so an SSH key, depending on where you store it, but also the password. And let me connect to this one as well. I deployed this one with a password. It's a Ubuntu 18, and I'm not that into Linux, so I don't go further than just provisioning some services and maintaining things like that. But I also want to show, I always demo this one, and I think Wim also knows this one, which is the parrot.live, which is the dancing parrot, which is available right over here. And as you can see, it's the same on a virtual machine, it's the same in a local machine. It's just a connection to your session host. And everything is available both for Linux and for Windows. Regarding the copy paste, so if you have a notepad, for example, running right over here, so this is my notepad on the virtual machine on VM. If I copy and paste this one, I go to my own PC, so you can see right over here, it's my own device. It's copied into my clipboard and it's available on my clipboard on my local machine to the VM. And if I copy and paste this into my clipboard and I go back to my VM, you can see that it's available in the clipboard on the VM as well. You can see this using the arrows right over here, which is used or visible for interaction with the clipboard. Or if you want to go full screen, then the button is over there as well. So now we are in full screen mode and we only see our virtual machine. Let's get back to you, Wim.
Yeah, so let me take control again. So my screen should be showing now.
Yes.
This one. Oh, no, it was not sure. Not anymore. It was gone. My fault. Yeah, there it is.
Yes.
Okay. So after that second demo, and thanks, Mika. Always love seeing that parrot. Let us now take a deeper look on how you can deploy Azure Bastion. First of all, like with every other deployment in Azure, it's best to check if the resource or the service itself, in case the Azure Bastion is available in your region or the region where you want to deploy and use it. Currently, Bastion is available in almost all regions, but there are still some regions where the service isn't available. So please check out that one before you start deploying. Hopefully, all of you also have an Azure governance strategy in place or use a specific Azure governance plan, which you need to follow. And then it's important to follow, especially for the naming of the Bastion host and all related resources like the PIP and the resource group. And of course, also follow your tagging convention to apply all necessary or required resource tag. A good tag to use in combination with Azure Bastion is, for example, one that describes the VNet. Best way to do it is to use the Hub VNet these days, but in this way, you can, by using that tag, easily find in which VNet the Bastion host is deployed. Before you deploy your Bastion host, you can already create the specific subnet, the Azure Bastion subnet, into your VNet. The subnet always need to have that specific name and should be at least /27 or larger. Thing you should also check is that you have the necessary address space in place and available in your VNet, because the thing we see a lot is that the complete address space is already used by other subnets, and then, for example, you can't deploy Bastion before changing the VNet address space. And in almost 90% of the cases, and especially when it's a production VNet or a hub VNet, it's not directly possible to do it without any downtime and without any changes in the back. So if you already deployed that subnet in advance and you want to better protect it via an NSG, they also have to be sure that all the necessary inbound and outbound security rules are in place to allow the necessary access. Otherwise, the Azure Bastion deployment will fail. Also, keep in mind that if you're using Azure Firewall or any other network virtual appliance you're using, you don't associate the Azure Bastion subnet in the route table. Otherwise, you will also end up with blocking the necessary traffic for the Bastion host to be working. Next to that, also know that the use of Azure Bastion in combination with Azure Private DNS zones is not supported at this time. So to make sure that your virtual network where you plan to deploy your Bastion host into is not linked to any private DNS zone. That's also an important design and deployment decision you need to make. The Bastion host itself requires a static public IP. You can also create that one in advance. When you do that, be sure to use a standard public IP SKU, and then you can start deploying Azure Bastion with whatever way you want to do it. You can use the Azure portal, you can use Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, or ARM templates, or Bicep these days. Pick whatever fits your needs. So like I already said on the previous slide, to harden the Azure Bastion subnet, you can use an NSG, and this to only allow the necessary inbound and outbound traffic. For the inbound security rules, you should at least allow TCP traffic on port 443 from the service stack internet. Also allow TCP traffic on port 443 and 4443, and this for the service stack gateway manager. You need this one to allow all management traffic. And if you, for example, use Azure load balancers for the health probes, you should also enable port 443 for the Azure load balancing server stack. This will enable your Azure load balancers in the back to detect any connectivity. And after those four, you can deny any other traffic with a priority of 900. For the outbound security rules, you should allow TCP traffic on port 339 and 22 to the service stack virtual network. And this to allow, be able to allow Bastion to manage all traffic on port on the different subnets for all the VMs. Next to that, you should also allow traffic on port 443 for the service stack Azure Cloud. The Azure Cloud Service Stack holds all the Azure Data Center public IPs, which among other things are required that the Bastion service to connect to various public endpoints within Azure, and they should be enabled and should be accessible to get Azure Bastion working. And finally, on all your VM subnets, you also should allow inbound TCP traffic on port 3389 for RAP or 22 for your Azure Bastion subnet IP range. So if you're missing one of the required rules, you will not be able to associate energy, and you will get an error like shown on the slide. So your deployment will fail, or when you even try to change or try to update the associated energy or try to remove it, to delete or change will fail if not all inbound or outbound security rules are in place. As an Azure admin these days, from time to time, you also need to be able to troubleshoot your Azure services. And just like most other services, you can also use log diagnostics for Azure Bastion. So when users connect to workloads using Azure Bastion, Bastion can log diagnostics of the remote sessions and other metrics. You can use those diagnostics to view which users, for example, connect to which workloads, at what time, and even from where. In order to use diagnostics, you just need to enable diagnostic logs on Azure Bastion. And you can, for example, use a log analytics workspace or even a storage account if you want to store those. So what about JIT access? Because we also talked about that one. Well, good to know is that you can combine JIT with Azure Bastion. The only thing you should be aware of is that you still need to request access first under the RDP or SSH tab, and then go to the Bastion tab, and then wait until the request is approved, and then go to the Bastion tab, fill in your username and password, and you can connect. Hopefully in the future, Microsoft will put that request access button also underneath the Bastion page, but until now, you need to do it and use it like this. Of course, there are also some RBAC rules required when connecting to a Bastion, or which you can foresee and better protect access control. First of all, the reader role on the virtual machine and on the NIC with the private IP of the virtual machine is required. Next to that, you also need to have the reader role on the Azure resource itself. And like almost everyone these days, if you're working with peered VNets, also at least the reader role on the VNet is required. Also good to know is that next to connecting to your Windows or Linux VMs via Bastion, you can also connect to all VMs in a VM scale set or even to the VMs in DevDev labs. And at the moment, maybe also something important, you can have around 25 concurrent RDP connections and around 50 SSH connections. But yeah, the number can really depends on if there are already ongoing RFP or SSH systems. But yeah, the number would almost fit that one. We also put in a link to an Azure Bastion deployment script I wrote in Azure PowerShell. It's validated by Micha, so we tested it out. The link to the blog post with all information in it, and also the GitHub page, the repository where you can download the script is available. This script will do everything. It will deploy the resource group, will create a pip, will configure and associate NEZ to the newly created Azure Bastion subnet, and it will even configure your diagnostics. So yeah, if you want to automate your Bastion deployments, we would advise to at least check it out. It can put you on your way. But let me quickly demo some things. So my portal is showing again. So for example, if your VM is protected with JIT, for example, and you need to connect to it, just like we showed, you just first need to go to the RDP, you click on the request access. When the request access is granted, let's wait a second for it. You just go to the Bastion, and just like Misha showed you, you fill in your username and password, and you can go on. But let me quickly show how we can. I already have a Bastion host in place. It's located in my hub V network. So if you want to configure the diagnostics, for example, through the Azure portal, you just click on this. I already have some in place. You select the log and the metrics, or if you just want to have the logs and don't want to have the metrics, you can skip one of those. You put in your subscription and log in the name of your log analytics workspace. But like we said, you can also archive it to a storage account and to any other partner solution Microsoft is working with. It's quite easy to set up. As an admin, maybe good to know is also if there are some connections made by Bastion to your VMs, and you want to look at those, you can click on sessions. Yeah, I have no connections at the moment. They will show up here. The nice thing is, if you scroll, put the sidebar completely to the right, you can even drop those specific connections. So you're able to see, manage, and do everything from in the session blade. But also let me show me how you can deploy to the portal. So I'm in my Bastion window at the moment. Just click on add. Let me take my sandbox subscription. You select the resource group where you want to deploy Bastion. It's already in place. You just type in a name, Bastion demo, for example, one. You select your region, let us say West Europe. You select the virtual network. You can see there's already a Bastion subnet created in that specific VNet. Just select that one. You can create a new public IP address, or you can use an existing one, already created one. You can fill in your tags, whatever you want to use, purpose. Let me just fill in demo, for example. You can review and create. Validation is passed, you click on create, and then it takes up to between 5 and 8 minutes before your Bastion is deployed. To give you a quick example, this is my GitHub page. Under my Azure Management repository, I have put in the script. If you deploy Azure Bastion through this script, everything is written down, what you need to change, whatever. You can also look at the specific blog post. It will deploy everything, and I think you can deploy Bastion within 7 minutes with all associated resources and necessary resources. So I would also advise to check out that one. So let me go back to my slides. I think, Micha, can you tell us something about the future roadmap before we're closing off?
So quick, a few items that are on the roadmap. The SSO with MFA, which is something that's really interesting. The PIM integration, where you have integration with Azure AD PIM. Auditing, it's where you have recording for auditing available, but also private IP for Bastion hosts, which means that even on top of the security from Azure Bastion host, you can only connect using a site-to-site or ExpressCloud connection. So that's definitely something to look at. And of course, if you have feedback, there's the Azure Bastion feedback page where you can do some suggestions. And the key takeaways.
Yeah, let me go through those. So before we're closing off, we just want to give you some key takeaways, 5 things we think you should really remember about our session of today. First of all, Azure Bastion is a PaaS service that you provision inside any virtual network, preferable the hub VNet, and which gives you a secure and seamless RDP SSH connectivity to your IaaS VMs, and this directly from inside the Azure portal over SSL. So when you use Azure Bastion, there's no need anymore to use a PIP for connecting to your VMs. So on this slide, with the new peering possibilities in combination with Azure Bastion, there is only one Bastion host required in your environment. And of course, you can harden your deployment of Bastion with just allowing the necessary inbound and outbound traffic in NSG, and by combining it, the use of your Azure Bastion with JIT. And last but not least, keep an eye on your CloudStream, because if you need to deploy several Bastion hosts in several separated subscriptions, yeah, it's a specific price you need to pay. So if you need to deploy 6 of them, it's already around 600 euros. So keep that one in mind. But yeah, normally you can go ahead with one and it should be good to use. And you can also, like Micha already said, deploy it, use it, manage your VMs, drop it, and deploy it again when you need to use it again. And for example, you can use our script for it. We also put some references in here. So if you want to read more, you want to look at the pricing, even if you want to know how to set it up from scratch, the links are there. And then I think, Micha, we only can say thank you for your attention, and we hope you enjoyed our session. If you have any questions, yeah, just like Micha said, you probably need to ping me, because Micha probably won't respond. But we're always happy to answer any of those. So just reach out, ask your question, and hopefully we can answer it. So thank you once again. And thank you for your organization for allowing us to deliver this talk.
Yeah, big thanks to the organizers. I don't know if there are people in who want to ask some questions. If not, then I think we can close up.
Just wait a few minutes, maybe. It's